instance, when I joined Formula Fords, was going to take you a season to get up to speed and so on. If you can run kind of midfield, you're doing good, and so on. And then we went down to Cape Town for our first nationals, and I put it on pole. And then had a humdinger dice with Mark Lead, who won the 2 heats. But like we'd put the stake in the ground. We were in the hunt for the championship right through the season. And in the first half of the season, we'd actually got to the lead of the championship. We were a couple of points ahead, and it was looking promising. Based on that, I got an invite to go and test with Eddie Jordan at the Jordan Grand Prix team. And at the time, I was like all of 17, I think. I'd never driven anything like an F1 car. So we went over, met with Eddie Jordan, and he had a guy named Martin Donnelly. Martin Donnelly was a Formula One driver some time back, had a horrific accident. So there was a hell of a conversation I had with him, like the most interesting and the nicest guy. And they had a couple of Formula Vauxhall Juniors. And so we elected to test with the Formula Vauxhall Junior. We went over, spent a day at Snetterton, and did the test. Went really well. It was super competitive. We were actually quicker than their own team driver. And I'd never driven this Formula Vauxhall. Like I got in this thing, and they were trying to do setups, and they'd say to me, okay, we're going to change this, and this is, tell us what you think. But then they'd go and do the opposite thing. And I'd come back in and go like, no, this doesn't feel like what you did. This is what it feels like you did. So it'd actually been a hell of a successful test. And then the following day, I went and spent the morning with Eddie Jordan. And we had a chat, and he said, all right, you want to drive a Formula One car, what's it going to take? And we started spitballing, and that was I think in 1996. And I needed to go and find 11 million rand in 1996 to get to Formula 3000, because the route was different in those days, but to get to Formula 3000, and if I showed any sense of talent, then we could talk. And it was at that point that I realized, like, okay, so maybe Formula One's not on the horizon, maybe we got to look at something else. But my dad was a successful businessman, and he'd done really well for himself, but he looked at me and he was like, he used to call me Boo. And my dad looked at me and he went, Boo, we're going to have to try something else because this is not going to work. Yeah. He was a hell of a nice guy. He was very, very blunt, very, I have a world's worth of drivers knocking on my door every day, what makes you special? And I'd already done the test with Martin, so Martin said to us all that my feedback was good, it was exceptional, and I was on the pace. And in fact, the only time I hadn't been quicker than their works driver, when they hadn't been quicker, was they banged on a new set of tires. They gave me 6 laps, and they said, "Go and thrash it." And I wasn't comfortable on the limit, and I was just the old bauer off his pace. But up until that point, I'd been leading the way and so on. So he said to me, "You've got talent, Have you got the drive? Have you got the motivation? Are you sure this is something you want to do? Because if you want to come and drive Formula One, the first thing you got to do is leave South Africa, leave your family behind. Take that big step, come to the UK." And at 16, 17, it's an intimidating thought. He wasn't particularly impressed because I went to see him and I wasn't wearing a suit. I wore a pair of jeans and a like a jacket, like a dinner jacket kind of thing. And he was expecting me to be suit and tie, and he told me so. He was very straight. He said, most of the drivers that are interested and serious in talking to me at least put on a tie. So I've actually got a letter somewhere. I must try and find it. And it was like a written thing that he and Martin had put together, going like, thanks for the meeting, and I thought a tie would have been more suitable, and da 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 da. Look me up when you've done Formula 3000 and we can talk, kind of thing. So it was great. But it was a bit of a wake up call as well, because in South Africa, you run your own cars, and like it was completely foreign to anything that I'd ever experienced. Yeah. Getting in an office of a guy that you see on TV, man, he's your hero, and he's one of the guys that like makes the world turn, and the next thing you're sitting in front of him, and opposite a big desk, it's quite a thing. I raced Formula Fords in 96 and 97. And in 96, the champion got a run at the British Formula Ford Winter Series.
Okay.
So, and at the halfway mark of the championship in 96, I'd actually been leading the championship, which was, I have no clue how that happened. And then it was one of those things where the championship went sideways, and we ended up finishing second to Mark lead. And that boy could pedal a Formula Ford, man. Yuck. He was hard to beat. So he won it that year. So he got the drive in the UK for the Winter Series. But my dad was like, no, bugger this, man. We must give this a shot as well. So we also went over. So I had a run with, I'm trying to think, I think it was the Works Van Diemen team. And I drove a guy named Vitor Meira's car, who I think he's in IndyCar now. Story short, of the 4 races of the Winter Series, I had 3 DNFs because the thing, every time I saw the rain, it just cut out. So you'd think that car would be used to the rain, but it wasn't. So it was very frustrating. And the one dry race that we had was at Silverstone, and I actually led it for a while. So again, I haven't a clue how that happened. So that was the first year. And then the second year, I won the championship in South Africa. And the prize that year was a run at the festival. But at the time, they called it the World Cup or the World Series or something. And it was to commemorate a special anniversary. Formula Ford World Cup, I think it was called. And I think it was like a one-off year where it was an anniversary, a 50-year or something like that of the festival. And Ford got involved and Jackie Stewart was involved, and it was quite lekker. And yeah, so it was a bit of a learning curve. I was with a team called Andy Walsh Racing, and I guess the co-driver of note there was Dan Walden, and he was really quick. So it was a bit of a learning curve. You know, we'd come from the Kents, which were the 1600s. They ran on Goodyear road tires, and rocked up there. And I hadn't driven on slicks for a while, and it was a different motor car. You know, it was a different thing from what I was used to. So the first day or two was playing catch up. But I remember, like just points of it. I remember finding like a 2/10 or 3/10 of a second, and going from 80th out of 120 competitors to like in the top 25, I think. So close. You would find like a half a 10th, and you would move up 10 places, and then they would find a 10th, and they'd move up 15 places, and so it was tight. And yeah, I made it to the final. And then I think I was running 10th or 11th or something, and we were making progress, steady progress. And they'd cut the fuel just a little bit too fine. And on the last 2 laps, I lost, I don't know, 5 or 6 places, and I think I finished sort of 15th or something. It was fun. It was quite lekker. And then on the back of that, it was a lovely guy. I'm not sure if he's still involved in motor racing, but I know his one son is. And so the guy's name was Neville Jordan, and he was involved with the Sports 2000s, and then following on from that, there was the start of the Shelby Can-Ams. He was involved in that. And correct, exactly correct. And he'd actually come over to watch the festival, and then he said to me, "There's a car in town in London or wherever it was, in a factory. I want you to go and have a look at it." And I went to have a look with him on the Monday morning, and it was my dad and my mom and Neville and I think 1 or 2 other people. And yeah, long story short, this was a thing called the BRM P301 Lamar car. And they said, "Well, do you think you can drive it?" And of course, I didn't say no. So that was how I ended up going from a Formula Ford to a Lamar car. It was a beautiful car, but it was a terrible thing. Like every time it turned a wheel, it tried to kill us and die. So it was quite sad. It was a bit of a rough thing. Beautiful. It started its life as a closed-top thing, and then by the time I got to see it, they'd lobbed the roof off it, which probably wasn't the best idea because it didn't handle particularly well. 100 horsepower until the turbos kicked in, and it went from 100 to about 550 in the blink of an eye, and like all hell broke loose. It was not a particularly refined motor car to drive. I did the festival in 97. 98, I joined up with the BRM guys, and my teammate was William Hewland of the Hewland franchise. Hell of a nice guy, and it was sort of the 2 of us that were going to give this thing a whirl. But we never made the start of a single race. Every time it broke in practice, it broke in qualifying, it broke it just continuously broke. It either detonated to pieces, or the suspension would fall off, or yeah, it was a terrible thing. So that was 1998 was pretty much a catastrophic waste of effort and money. Um, in the second year, then, at the end of '98, we went and spoke to. There was a very famous Porsche team back in the days, privateer Porsche team called Kramer Racing, and they had run some South African drivers. And Erwin Kramer actually approached us, wanted to know if we would be interested in running third driver in one of his Kramer K8s. So obviously we were just desperate to jump ship, which we did, and we had one or two races in that, and that was different. That was at least that was a beautiful motor car to drive, a lovely thing, based on a Porsche 962 open top thing, beautiful, just beautiful. So that was the Kramer K8. That was a Porsche twin turbo V6, 3.2 V6, and then at the end of '98 they had placed an order for this Lola B98, and the B98 was the one that came with the Roush. It was actually a NASCAR motor, a fully tuned NASCAR race motor. It was fantastic. It had lots of power. Yeah. So that was a much more successful year. We actually did okay. We had a lot of mechanical issues, but when we got it to the finish, we got a podium and stuff. So that was pretty cool. So it was actually a European base of there was the American Le Mans series, which I think was running at more or less the same time. The system, here's my bubbles again, raced in the World Sports Racing Cup, which was FIA European based. I don't think it had races outside of Europe. We certainly didn't do any. It had raced for a season or two. Yeah, so it wasn't the Le Mans thing, but we did actually race at Le Mans that year. In '99, we did the Le Mans 24-hour, which was quite interesting. Yeah, that was in the Lola. Yeah, that was the full thing with all the carbon groceries and the carbon brakes and the extra horsepower, and that was quite an experience. At Le Mans, like, you're so busy with everything that's happening, and there's these sort of public events, and there's meet the people and meet the sponsors and all of that, and the next thing you know, it's Saturday morning and you're racing, and it's like, but hang on, I haven't had a chance to absorb it all yet, like whoa. So it was amazing, though, absolutely amazing. Yeah, remember we were doing really well. So there. It was a bit of a scandal. There were three of these Lola B98s entered. I think it was three, maybe four. And they came to us the morning of the race, and Lola guys, and they said the gearboxes won't last 24 hours. So, but we have one spare. So the first person to put the money in gets the only spare gearbox that we have. So there was all this behind the scenes meetings and so on, and the general consensus amongst the teams was no one would buy the gearbox. No one would take the gearbox. We'd all take our luck and make it fair. And I mean, I was given these strict instructions on how to treat this gearbox, and my life depended on it, because Mr. Kramer himself was like, this car, it will not last the full 24 hours, and if you break it, there will be shizer. He was so stickler about it. And I mean, we nursed that gearbox in for a good 11 and a half hours, and before it failed. But we'd gone way past any of the other cars. We'd really fettled that thing, and so we, at 11 and a half hours, we pitted. They rebuilt the box with the components that they had. So we had spares, but never full spare box. And the idea was change the gearbox, and we were like, well, we'll change the internals. But it didn't work. There was just too much damage done, and that was the end of it. But I mean, at one point we'd been the highest placed privateer team, which was great. The lap times at night were good, they're comparable to anyone else's and stuff. So it had been good, and the plan was always to go back the following year and give it a proper shot. We knew the car was new. We only got the car, I think, in the March or the April. Sure. So Le Mans was literally the first event we did with it. Like we did a day's testing at Monza, threw it in the truck, took it back to the shop, polished it, cleaned it, sent it off to Le Mans. So we knew the chips were always going to be against us. And it was a hell of a ride. It's one of those things that will stick with you for life. I can tell you from my own experience, your head sticking out the cockpit, because it was obviously an open top car. The buffeting, it would make my eyes water. It was so ferocious that my eyes were running. And then you get to the end of the straight and you jump on the brakes, and the tears would start flicking onto your visor, the inside of your visor. So now you start getting these watermarks as the tears dry. And we were doing, I think we topped out in the race somewhere in the region of about 340 k's, and like some of the GT Porsches were topping out at about 260. So I mean, the closing speed at the end of the straight was sort of 60, 70 k's an hour. It was ferocious. And then of course it rained. It's like there's little spots of rain, and then like one lap it's sort of drizzling, and the next lap it's dry, and the next lap it's drizzling, and then it's raining, and then it's drizzling. So it was wild. It was absolutely wild. It was yeah, petrifying. Absolutely petrifying. And there's something about, like, I mean, you know what it's like. You drive race cars as well. You know that feeling of, you get those barriers. Like the first time you hit 160, and then the first time you hit 200, and then the first time you hit 250. I must tell you, the first time I hit 300, I knew, like, if something goes wrong at this speed, I'm tickets. There's no chance. And that was the year the Mercedes were doing the backflips. So, yeah, I was standing in the pit lane waiting to go out for my session. I had my kit on. I had everything ready, like ready to jump, and there were two screens. And the one screen is the pit lane, and then the other screen is the live feed. And I'm standing in the box and I'm waiting for the car. And I'm sort of watching the pit lane feed, and I just catch the back end of Mark Webber's flip. And I remember standing there watching this car disappearing, backflipping into the trees. And my team boss, Erwin, came off the pit wall, and he grabbed me and he took me away, and he goes, "No, you can't drive now. Yeah, you can't drive now." And he was like, because like we were all convinced that, like, this was the next fatality, So like I missed an entire section where he was just like, "No, you're not driving now. You drive the next session. That's fine. You drive the next session." It was quite an eye-opener,
Sure.
It makes you realize that, like, this is serious, And fortunately, all of the guys got out the cars in one piece. I think they backflipped 3 cars at that Le Mans, whether in practice or pre-practice, pre-qualifying, and then again in the race. And then they called all the cars and they parked them, Where he was doing it, it was so weird. Like, it's right at the end of the straight, and there's like a section where you go up over like a very small crest, and then you come down the other side, and then just a short period later you brake and you turn for the right hand at the bottom of the straight. But that dip was just enough that your stomach would just sink as you went into it and then over it. So like, and no one knew why the cars were doing it. Like, there was all these rumors at the time of, like, the car was bottoming, and then as it got up, it would get air underneath it. And I mean, we knew that we were in the same boat, It's that kind of thing where there's no answer, And it's not the first time it's happened at Le Mans, Guys have backflipped many times at Le Mans, It certainly wasn't the first or the last occasion. So we never went back in 2000. So it was one of those things, I think, where, money was tight, sponsorship was tight. There were a couple of different options on the table for Vodacom at the end of the year. The agreement that I had with them was only ever a 2-year agreement. And the following year, if I remember rightly, Gary Formato got the seat. But I think they did 1 or 2 sporadic events, and he was in O'Reilly and Scott at the time, and that was, they got the sponsorship and moved on forward. And that was sort of like, it was unfortunate. I think we were quite close to doing it. We were starting to have those conversations with some of the teams that were sort of coming to me and going, another year or 2 and come and talk to us, So it was a bit unfortunate, but it was also, it's life. It's the way it is. You can't win them all. The first year in the UK, which was quite lacquer, and then the second year I went and lived in Cologne, and I was closer to the team for the Kramer guys. And we did quite a lot, man. We did, like 5 or 6 races that year. So we did the lion's share of the season. The car arrived quite late, so we missed, I think, the first 2 or 3. So like I said, we went basically straight into Le Mans, and then we did everything afterwards, including Kyle Army. In fact, the car came out for the South African leg, so that was cool. I did first lap, first corner. Yeah, no, I thought I'd make it a bit more challenging, So it was, yeah, you know what it's like. It's the red mist and the brain fade, man.
And
All
it
the
was
gear, no idea. Well,
coming
he
up.
didn't. It wasn't even his fault, man. It had a silly design on the rear upright and the stub axle basically, and obviously it was a single lock-on wheel and so on. And I remember the guys at the team saying that this is going to be a problem at some point. And the guys went to Lola, and Lola said, no, they've tested it. It's the same as the ones on the Indy car and all of this. And true's nuts, the wheel actually come loose. But it had machined itself into such a diabolical mess that we couldn't get it on or off.
Oh,
It had just machined itself into this unique piece of buggery that was going so that was actually the reason I think why we didn't finish that race. I don't even think they ever got it off. I can't even remember now. It's such a long time ago. But yeah, we done okay up to that point, and then yeah, it's those silly things, man. It's like that hindsight, like, oh, we knew we should have chased it, but we didn't, and it let us down, and such
yeah.
is life. That race, for what it's worth, I remember the heavens opened like just before the race. It absolutely chucked it down like a proper Joburg Kyalami December thunderstorm. And they were like, no, it's we can't race like this, we can't race like this. And then they're like, okay, so we're racing. Like, go now, get your stuff, we're going. And I'm like, we'll wait for it to dry. It'll get a bit better. We'll wait for the puddles. Like I remember there were rivers of water running across the track, and they're like, no, we race now. It's fine. So yeah, so I got completely outdone. Like I think it was up at Nashua. I don't know what they called it now, but yeah, it was turned to at Kyalami, and I just got it turned around and how to let the wall beyond me. I think I stopped about a foot from the
How
wall.
did the chevron come about? Then? How did that all come together?
Yeah, that was a special car. So we took a couple of years sabbatical. We came back from overseas. I felt like I'd achieved everything that I wanted to. Um, didn't really want to go. Like I tried for a year or two to get back into Formula Fords. At that point, the Z-Techs had just been launched, and they were lekker. I liked the tech, and I liked I wanted to give it a go. But also, in the back of my mind, I realized like we spent a lot of money on my career, you know, and I felt like if I'd had the opportunity overseas and I didn't make it, then that was about as much as I could ask my mom and dad for with a straight face, Like I felt like I'd probably, if I was going to achieve it, I would have achieved it at that point, and for us to go racing again just kind of didn't make financial sense. So then my dad retired, and through he and a guy named Don Vale is a family friend of ours and a lovely lovely family. Don and Claire Vale, most
Lovely.
most other guys know Claire,
Yeah.
absolute sweetheart, huge fan. And my dad and Don Vale had gone off-road racing years and years and years prior, and Claire decided she wanted to try a bit of racing. And my dad said, okay, well, so he used his contacts, and she drove a Formula Ford, and I think she drove a Shelby, and I can't remember what else she got to play with. Settled on the Shelby. So that's what started, and then my dad said, oh, well, he'll help them run. I think it was a Shelby Can-Am. He said, well, he'll help get us started and up to speed, and they had a lot of fun together. And then the one day, I'd been doing other things, graphic design and a bit of web design and photography, and I had a nice job, but it was a 9 to 5 job. And then my dad said to me, you know what, babe, come back. Let's start a racing business. Come back to the factory. Let's build some race cars and stuff. And so we hummed and hawed for a bit, and that's kind of how we got back in. But then we didn't have any cars because we sold all the cars and sold everything, and by that point, Don and Claire were self-sufficient. They were doing their own thing, and so on. So we it started off with a thing called an ACD Nardini,
Yeah.
and I think it was so much fun. It was a guy named Mario Nardini and Corbus, Mario and Corbus, and they invited us to their place in town, and they were building this beautiful body, beautiful. And they said, well, you're going to put the body on a single seater, like a Swift or a Ray, or one of the old GTRs, and you're going to turn it into a sports car. And my dad said, no, yes, this is something we can get behind. And we thought, yeah, we lekker, we're going to buy a Formula GTI and bang a body on it and go and have some fun.
Yeah.
So that was how it started. Built the car, had so much fun with that car. It was just a giant killer. It was so much fun. But what it meant was my dad was back now thoroughly in the racing scene, and he had bought a Chevron B8. Trying to think the origins of the car. I'm not actually sure now. Roger Pierce made a
And then he
few.
made. Okay.
Roger Pierce made 6, if I remember rightly.
Okay.
And going back way, way, way back to like 94, 95, somewhere around there, we had one of those Rogers cars. And that became Jono DeToy raced it, the red Chevron B8. So that my dad and I built years back in 94, 95, somewhere around there.
Sure.
So, and my dad was like a Chevron fan, and he said, no, well, let's get another B8. So, and he wanted to race it. So I'm not actually sure where our one came from, but we had a B8 that was also one of Roger's cars. Also had a BMW motor, the 2002 Ti motor, and we had some fun with that. And then heard that the B16 was on the market, and it was one of those things where, like, I've always been a Chevron fan, and there was the B8, the B16, and the B19, and I wanted a B19. But there were no B19s, and then at the 16 and the 19 came on at the same time. They were both on the market, and for financial considerations more than anything else, we bought the B60. And I wasn't blown away by it until I drove it. And when I drove that thing, it was just absolute game changer. Like, it was the kind of thing where you expect it to be a Toyota Corolla and turns out to be an Audi TT. You know what I mean? It's that kind of thing. It just blew my socks off. Fell in love with it. And that was, and that's how we got the 16, and that's how we got back into historic racing. It was a continuation. It was a weird one. So that one was built by Chevron, using original Chevron parts and an original Chevron chassis, but it was designed originally or assembled originally to be a road car. So, and I believe that was one of 2 that were going to be road cars. So the bodywork, it had like in the venting in the boot, it had a spot for the number plate, which the original ones had the venting from the top to the bottom in the center section, and this didn't. This had a little spot for a number plate and so on. But it had original chassis plate. It was just built in or registered or certified or whatever in early 1990s. So, but all original parts and original everything, and that was the story of that one. That thing was like the thing was like, it was one of those cars where, in all the time I drove it, and I did a lot of laps in it. The first time I drove it was, in fact, the very first time I drove it was at Swartkorps, and we're up at the top of the hill, and I can't remember I think it was 7 or 8, where you go through the right hand and then the left hand flick, just before you come down the hill to the pits. And I hit second and I hit third, and as I hit third, it snapped the half shaft, and it just revved the bejesus out of this thing. It just went, and that was that was one BDG motor in its murin. It was in pieces. So, but like the bug had bitten with it. So we got the new motor out from the UK. I don't even know how much of my inheritance went down the drain that day. I think all of it. But we got this Burton Power sub-assembly, put the thing back together. And in all the time I drove it, I never spun it. I never lost it. I never went wide. I never left the track with that thing. You could drive it, you could wring its neck, and it just begged for more. It was the most incredible motor car. And we took on big cars with that. Proper big cars. And it just had a lion's heart, man. Gave you so much confidence. You could literally chuck it at anything, and it was like a Jack Russell Terrier, you know. You could chuck it at anything, and it would give it a fucking good go. Yeah, I was on the outside, if I remember rightly, and I thought, you bugger, because he pushed me out the side, and I'd never hope in hell, but I was still going to give it a good shot. Came out, I think he came out with that thing 2 years. It started, I'm trying to remember now. I remember, I think it was Nigel Hume, wasn't it? And he had a
Yes,
T70. That was, I think, the
yes,
first year.
that,
That's it. So that thing was fast. Like we tried, but that was too fast. And then I think then the following year was possibly Campagna, and then there was the Ferrari,
yes, that was
uh,
late.
Laidlaw's Ferrari. Shame. I remember he crashed it the one heat. I think it was the
Yes,
second heat. He put it in the wall, and that was the end of. Yeah. The problem is that thing had legs for days, 4 days.
for
So like there
sure.
was only a few places where you could you could get your head in the game and have a hope and hell of breaking. Because I think we that 16 handled like something like nothing else. It was. So I knew if we could keep it in front through the twisty bit, we'd have a half a shot. But yeah, I remember that it was a good tussle that actually, and he was the nicest guy. Hey, just the most fantastic guy. He came afterwards and we had a long chat. I didn't know he's like Lord Irvin Laidlaw.
Yeah,
Absolutely insane. Yeah, and the people we met through the racing as well. Like it's just such a privilege, you know. You look at all the names and the like the experiences and so on. You know, it was just a great way of living life. You know, having a
yes,
jaw. Yeah, I was proper racing.
it's
It
impressive.
wasn't an inch given, and I mean, I like I knew where we could be cheeky on the track. You know, if you think, I mean, at one point I knew Swartkorps like the back of my hand. I mean, I must have done thousands of laps around there, literally thousands, tens of thousands. Where we could be a bit cheeky, and I knew where we could give it a bit of a go. And I also knew that that car of his was worth 100 times what ours was. But then he didn't back down, and I was like, oh, hang on, I'm gonna have to rethink this because, you know, that like that the value of that car is like a small country's global debt, you know. And he was driving around SWAT corps, and I just, sure, very
Yeah,
brave man, very brave. Yeah, so it's quite a lesson from him that day. Yeah,
and
at the last corner of the last lap,
yes,
he turned it around and put it in the wall, and I didn't even see that. Like I missed because he had just got ahead of me, and he had just enough of a gap that as I came out, he had already clanged the wall, and I didn't see him. I didn't realize that he had crashed, so I got in thinking like, oh, well, oh, seconds, okay, we'll take that. And my dad was like, no, mate, like he put it in the wall, and it's a bit tired, and I need a bit more than a polish to clean it up. So yeah, I don't think I did 2010. If I remember rightly, James Forbes drove the car in 2010, but I'm not sure. I was sick. I remember one year
that's
for
when you,
oh I had a I always had health issues, man, right from a kid, and it had a bit of a flare up thing, and I ended up in hospital, and I couldn't drive the car, and then the next best thing was like I've mentioned James before. James had driven he had a Lotus with us as our team, as one of the team cars, and we ran the car for him, and he was just the most fantastic human being I know. Like James, I think I learned a lot about life from James. He was a fantastic mentor, and may he rest in peace. He had a real impact on my life, and I chatted to my dad. In hospital, I wasn't able to attend, and I said, you know what? There's only one guy that can drive this thing. We have to give it to James. And I have a sneaky feeling he actually turned it down. He tested it and drove it on the week practices. I can't remember him driving race against Bernard. And I remember one occasion I was driving a Shelby Can-Am. I think it might have been Claire Vale's car. Again, a couple of years. I mean, it was a couple of years after I'd sort of semi-retired, and it was sort of we were running the club stuff and the historics and stuff. But I think he may have either recently won or something the Shelby Can-Am Championship.
yes,
And I was driving the wheels off the Shelby Can-Am, and he came past me, and he made that thing look like it was on rails. It was, it was like, it was like you think you know everything, you know, and then this old toppy, and I say that in inverted brackets, this old toppy comes past you and gives you an absolute snot clap, and he looks so elegant in doing it that you're actually in awe, you know. You're just in awe of like this lesson that you've just been given from this oak that was just, yeah, just at his age and his abilities, it just took my breath away. And it was something really inspiring to drive that car and to be sitting behind him and getting a lesson in driving, but a proper driving lesson, and you're doing
100%.
everything you can, and you think you're this hotshot sports car aficionado, and yeah, and it was humbling, absolutely humbling, an
It
absolute legend of a
makes
human being.
it
It's one of those things where I looked at him and I'm like, he's probably forgotten more than I will ever learn in a lifetime of motorsport. I was never particularly talented. I've always thought like I I had to do things the hard way. Like I had to go and put in the hours and do the testing, and I had to just involve my entire life in motorsport to be half-assed good at it. Um, but it wasn't through talent. It was through sweat and the school of hard knocks and effort and so on. And then I look at someone like him, and I was just like, I mean, he just had everything. He had all the talent, he had all the skills, he had all the determination. We were fortunate enough through our little business to rebuild a car of his, and
there you go.
there you go. Yeah, and it was the kind of thing you'd come in and you would go, oh, but what about this and what about that? And it was stuff that like we put a pretty good car together.
Yeah,
He knew more. He just knew more. He just on everything. It wasn't even like he could drive the car. He could engineer the car. He could think the car. He could fabricate the car. He was like one with those things, and it was.
and absolutely
And he loved his
special.
rotaries. He loved his rotaries. Like he wouldn't drive anything else. I just remember him going, no, it's got to have a rotary. No, it's got to have a rotary. And we were like, no, put a BDG in it. And he's like, no, it's going to have a rotary in it. I had a weird relationship with my dad growing up where he was a hard taskmaster. So we'd go-karting and we'd spend the morning at Swartkoop. We'd be there before the sun was up. And by the time everyone else came to practice at sort of mid-morning, we were done. And then we'd go home. And I'll never forget, we had an old combi, and we took the middle seat out the combi, and that was where the cart went for a while anyway. And I remember he was a stickler for things being just right. And he had this way of like, we'd pull the carts out, put it on a stand, he'd go and, I don't know, he'd go watch cricket, or he would faff around the house, or he'd do whatever. But my job was now like I had to clean the cart. And he used to give me a paraffin gun, and in those days you'd put petrol in the paraffin gun, not paraffin. You put petrol and you wash that thing, and spit and polish and toothbrush and get in everywhere, and it'll be spick and span. And then I'd have to go call my dad, and I'd go, hey Dad, come check it out. And he'd look at it, and he wouldn't pick anything out. He'd just look at it and go like, no, it's cock. You haven't done it. Do it again. And I go, but what have I missed? And he'd go, you'll find it when you do it again. And then he'd go back inside, and I'd watch this thing again. So it was that was the relationship I had with my dad. So we go racing and we'd have a best time. He was like my best China. And then we'd get home again and he was this hard taskmaster, and I would be like, but come on, Dad. No, like I'm doing my best, Dad. And he'd be like, do it properly. And we used to clash heads. And we did that right through my school career. So it was an odd relationship that I had with him. It was weird when I got out of school and I started to, I guess, I was a bit more adult, and I think I reached a point in my life where my dad was like, okay, cool, like I'm done schooling this kid now, like he can stand on his own 2 feet, and we became like best buds. He really was my mentor. He was my best mate. He passed a couple of years ago, and it's that when you ask me questions like stories about racing with my dad, it's heart sore, but it's also fucking lekker. Excuse my language, but it's fucking lekker because yes, we had so much fun together. And that was a big thing for me. When we were racing and we were at the track, there was no expectation. My dad wasn't the kind of guy that would put me under pressure. He would be like, his thing he always said to me, always, I'll never forget it. In fact, I'm going to turn it into a tattoo one day. He always used to say to me, keep a cool tool, bud. And that was like, go out, have fun, don't crash, don't hurt yourself, do your best. That was like that was the code. But there was a few occasions where I'll forget to the one was the old Volcom. I think in those days was the Volcom 2-hour, the old Volcom track.
Yeah.
Yes, and we were having a lekker jol, and he was going to do the second hour, I think, and I was going to do the first hour. Or I can't remember. it was something like that. But anyway, so we had to refuel the car halfway through. So lucky, we got a drum of petrol, we got a thing, we got a stand, we got a siphon tube. Hey, lekker. Problem is, the thing overflowed the fuel, and it all overflowed into the cockpit area, and then caught fire. So the next thing I know, I'm sitting and I'm surrounded in these flames right around me, but like a proper bonfire. And I pull the wheel off and I jump out the car, and like the first thing that goes through my hand or my mind is like, okay, cool. Like I'm in one piece. I'm not on fire. Everything's lekker. I turn around and I look at my dad, and he's got these cotton gloves on, but the petrol splashed all over the hood. So he's doing this thing with his hands where he's like trying to put the fire because his gloves are on fire. So I think, okay, well, let's, once in a lifetime thing, lekker. Two's nuts. Like 2 years later, we're racing Formula Fords in Cape Town, in testing, and I blow a motor, drops a rod through the block, and there's a big mess, oil everywhere, everything. And I think it might have even been qualifying. It actually might have been a qualifying thing. In fact, I think it was. And we'd thrown a rod in qualifying, so there was this mad rush to now put the spare motor in and so on. Same thing. My dad's got his cotton gloves on. There's Jan Hock was interviewing me at the time. I mean, and I look over at my dad, and the car is ready to race. You've got the motor in, and it's very lekker. And like, Jan, I'm like, oh yeah, cool. No, we got this. We lekker. And I casually look into the pit. I look at my dad, and my dad, for anyone that remembers my dad, he was a prolific smoker, and for whatever reason, he still had his gloves on. He still had his cotton gloves on, soaked in petrol, because we'd been cleaning the car, and we'd mopped all the oil up, and we'd mopped the oil off the floor. My dad, as I look at my dad, he puts the smoke in his hand, and he lights it, sets his fucking hands on fire again. And I'm just like, and I'm in the middle of an interview, and I'm just like, yes, like cowboy stuff, man. But we had so much fun, man. We had so much fun. And I think, I was fortunate enough to run a business with my dad. And that was my dad's hobby business. When I say it was a business, it was my dad's hobby and it was my business. And he made all the decisions and I did all the running around, and he threw lots and lots of money in it, and we had the best time. But it was the kind of thing, and I was chatting to one of the guys one of the guys that used to work with me. And it was the kind of thing where we've gone on our own separate ways. I've run a business building websites for a living now, and this mate of mine is still in cars, but he services cars and that kind of thing. But we were saying, like, my dad had built this within the business. There was the spirit of buggery, and you could never let your guard down because there was always some scam on the go. There was always some buggery on the go. And I mean, it was just, he would plant the seed. He would just like give you a little whisper, go like, hey, and then, so this is so it just set the trend for this business where there was always shenanigans on the go. And I mean, it was things like you'd pick your coffee cup up and you'd take a big swig of your coffee cup and there'd be like nuts and bolts and shit in your cup. So you hear the clink clank as you duck this thing. And then at one point, this poor rat, this deceased rat, we used to run the business from a factory, and this deceased rat was found one day in the factory. The next thing I know, this rat is in the coffee. This rat is in the Oaks number plate. It's tied to his number plate when he goes home. And it was the most fantastic time of my entire life. Every other business that I've ever been involved in has never matched up to that. And it was because of that spirit that my dad had, He had this naughty streak, and there was always some cuck on the go. You could never let your guard down. Never let. One day I was fixing, he had, I can't remember whose car it was, but it was a friend of ours, Suzuki Jimny, and the light stopped working. And they were right in the mud, and he's like, no, Boo will fix it. Like, I used to do all the wiring, so I was always open. I had to fix wiring stuff. And I got my hands under, and my mate Sean used to work for me, also a Formula Ford racer, a guy named Sean Sweet, and he and I are very close. He and I used to work together as well. He sneaks up with this taser, but he calls everybody. He goes, guys, come. And he sneaks up behind me, and he lets this taser go right next to my ear. So I got my hands in this boot. I'm giving it everything. Everyone, and I've noticed people coming around, but I'm in a bad mood because now it's like, I don't want to work on road cars. I want to work on racing cars. Like, don't give me road cars. And I'm covered in grime and dirt and mud, and I'm trying. Someone goes next to my ear. And it was that kind of thing. There was just, there was always. But as much as it was fun, it was always serious, you know. There was all the time for gags and there was all the time for that. But at 4 o'clock in the morning and you get a motor back and you're busy putting a motor in a race car and it's leaking oil and the motor's got to come out. My mate, that motor comes out, you know. There was one occasion where we literally pulled an all-nighter and put the cars in the trailers and then drove to Pekisa, did a full day's testing at Pekisa, and then came home. And I mean, we'd been 48 hours or whatever it was without sleep.
Sure.
So there was that side of it as well. But even while we were all pulling an all-nighter, there's still shenanigans, you know, and that's. And my dad was a formidable racer. You know, he raced everything. So he started my early memories of him racing off-road cars. And that's how he knew people like Don Vale and Claire Vale, and that's how he knew Bucks Carolyn and Richard Schilling, and he and Richard were in business together. And these are all big names, you know, they're all kind of people that I might not necessarily have raced with or against formally, but they're like also the icons of sports. And that was, in those days, there was that kind of sense of humor, you know, that was always on the go. There was always shenanigans on the go. And he sort of carried that with his life. And he sort of brought that into everything that we did together as well. So, yeah, he raced karts and he raced bikes and he raced off-road bikes and he raced off-road cars, even raced Formula GTRs at one point.
Sure.
So it's really an interesting story, by the way. And you might, just on this topic, which I think you might enjoy, we were racing Lotuses in the Lotus Challenge at Pekisa. And I think it was James Forbes's car. And the motor was off and it just wasn't performing. And we knew it wasn't performing. And it had those BMW touring car motors. And I mean, they were scarce. They were scarce, but they were incredible motors. But we didn't have a spare one. And on that topic, Clippy's Krieger, like the nicest gentleman you'll ever meet. Clippy says, I have a spare motor, but it's in Joburg. So then Glenton Rebello goes, I have an aeroplane. Why don't I fly to Joburg? This is on the Friday night. Glenton got in his plane, shot up to Joburg, picked the motor up, brought the motor back to the track. The team and I were on standby. We put that motor in that car overnight. Clippies was in there, Glenton was in there, everyone. There was just spanners and bits of paper and it was amazing. And I stand corrected, but I think James may have won the next day. I mean, where would you ever hear that anywhere in life, you know? And you look at that and you just go like, surrounded by real gem human beings, you know. Exactly what you were saying earlier, just that camaraderie, you know, was mind-blowing. He's a rock star.
He's still
I can tell you about Glenton as well. Glenton can drive the wheels off a Lotus. Let me tell you what, that boy can pedal those things. Yes, he and I had some humdinger races. Absolute humdingers, because his car, he had a really strong motor. He had an Opel 2-liter motor. So Glenton's car had an Opel 2-liter motor that he and his dad tuned, and that thing was strong. Yes, that thing was strong. But we had a car that handled, and I remember it was no inch asked or given. Like, we never drove each other off the track. We had one or two times where we brushed wheels and stuff, but it was never malicious. But hell's bells, we had some humdinger races. Like, he can drive. Glenton can absolutely pedal. So the two occasions, SV400s, and so a guy named Peter Schmidt-Loeffler, also an absolute gem of a human being. Like, really, I keep saying it, but it just goes without saying that. Yeah, I was so surrounded by lovely people. And in the team that we had, like everyone that participated in the team that we ran as well, were particularly nice guys. So it was a great time in my life. But Peter Schmidt-Loeffler sold the car, and we bought it. He was like, you know, I want you to have it. And he offered it us at this kind of deal that you just can't say no.
Yeah.
The whole idea was for James to have his best opportunity at winning the championship. And the role I was there was to try and support that however I could, you know. So we developed the cars together. It was like a proper team spirit kind of thing. And it was great. It was really great. And it went down to the wire. I mean, I think Glenton won it, but by a whisker, you know, 1 or 2 points at the end of the year. But possibly one of the most rewarding cars that I also got to drive. A fantastic thing. I mean, it was so quick, and it was screened. It absolutely screened, and it had sequential gearbox and all of the groceries, and they were just fantastic, absolutely fantastic. Actually, I don't know if you know this, but I raced a Fun Cup car at Belgium
I
for a
know
25-hour race.
it's
That thing, actually, that year was two cars, right? So they had the new diesel powered Fun Cup, and we had the petrol powered one. That was so. It was in my team. I know with James's team, it was James. Oh, I can't remember. Clippies, Del Bianco. Anyway, and then in our car we had myself, John Glover, Roy Joyce, and Etienne Stradham. Anyway, so long story short, that Fun Cup thing, 25 hours of awesome. Like that was the most fun I ever had behind the wheel of a race car, ever, hands down, by a country mile. It
sure.
was fantastic fun. It was one of those things. We started like 80 something on a field of 160 cars. When we eventually got onto La Source, was it La Source? Yeah, La Source. The leaders were already up over the hill, up Eau Rouge, and they were gone. Like they were out of sight. That's how many cars it was. Like the start took like 2 minutes or something for all the cars to make their way past. And at the end of the first stint, I did the first stint, and at the end of the first stint, we were well inside the top 20.
Bloody hell.
So after 2 hours of running, we had overtaken like 60 cars. It was fantastic fun. The best thing I've ever had. And I was so fortunate. Like, it was one of those things where I think I was just a bolt on, you know. It was the kind of thing where like, okay, well, let's invite Grant and let's see, you know, maybe we can do something. And that was such fun, man. Honestly, I was so blessed for that. It was the green and blue. Yeah. I mean, it wasn't green and blue by the time we finished. I think it had a red bonnet because I knocked the bonnet off on something. It was good fun. And I must tell you, we did 25 hours on the same set of brakes. I don't even think we changed brake pads. We ran the same set of tires for 25 hours. It
Sure.
was such a joy. Such a joy. Like you'd end up going down the Camel Straight, and there would be like 6 cars in front and like 20 behind. And like as you start to close each other in the toe, like the one would break and the next would break and the next would break, and then they would start to stack. And you'd have 4 runs of these things with like 10 cars in each queue, hammering along to the chicane. And then you get to the chicane and there's tire smoke and bashing wheels, and do that like 30 consecutive laps. Like every time you get there, it's just an absolute shitfest of cars and parts and dust and stones and gravel. And no, it was fantastic. Shit, I like so you. It was so much. There were so many cars that like you would be touching the car in front, and this is like you're probably doing I don't know like 180, 200 or something down that back straight. Like it's not particularly fast, but you would eventually tow and you tap the guy in front because you can't go left and you can't go right to pass because there's cars there, you know, there's just rows of cars.
Yeah.
And then the next one taps you, so you feel like the donk is like he taps you, and then donk is you push this oak, and then you plonk, 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 and you all like latch on, and you go early down the straight, flat out on the cable, and then like you get to the braking marker, and like the guy at the front brakes because like he's only oak that like he arrives there first, but you nose to tail like 4 cars behind, so as he brakes, everyone goes clonk, clonk, clonk again. It was just great. I was fortunate. I was very fortunate, and I think I can never say I was ever hard done by motorsport wise and having the right equipment. You know, I was blessed with that. You know, and you look back at it. I look back at it now and I look at the amount of money and time and effort that my mom and my dad put into my racing career. And at the time when you're living it, you kind of you're not wise to the world. There's a sense of naivety that this is almost due, you know, like so my job is to make sure that I'm competitive, fit, enthusiastic, technically savvy, and I put the hours in. That's my job.
Yeah.
Mom and dad's job is to bring the best equipment they possibly can. And that's the way you feel. But when I look back on it now and I look at the amounts of effort and time and money and dedication that my folks put into it, you know, they invested massive. And through their investment, I got amazing opportunities. Amazing opportunities. Like the Vodacom thing with Neville was a gift beyond any measurement. You know, it was an unfortunate thing that the first car that we drove was a bit of a scrapper, but it doesn't alter the fact that predominantly Neville saw something in me that he liked, and he wanted to see me succeed, and uh, I'm still a Vodacom user for exactly that reason, because it's that kind of thing where it gave me an opportunity that I would never have had any other way, and a few of these opportunities came along, like I say, with James and John Glover and the Spa thing and all of these opportunities. Look at that, and I look at my mom. I mean, I think I probably could have retired by now if my mom and dad had put that money into a bank account and said, you know what, take up tennis. I would have been a
Yeah.
wealthy guy, because she's like, I can just imagine, how much money it cost over all the years, and I can only ever be grateful for it, But it's nothing, it's it's nothing that I ever did particularly better than anyone else. I just had really amazing opportunities and really amazing relationships with people.